The emergency lights of Outpost Kappa 12 flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the debris-strewn corridor. Derek Mason moved with practiced silence, his boots hardly making a sound against the metal flooring. 8 years as a Frontier Forces soldier had taught him how to move through hostile territory, and 5 more as a freelance scavenger had perfected the skill. Atmospheric pressure stable, but oxygen levels dropping in the east quadrant, reported the digitized voice of his wrist scanner. Structural integrity at 47%. Derek grimaced beneath his rebreather mask. The station was in worse shape than the salvage contract had indicated. 3 weeks ago, a rogue asteroid had clipped the research outpost, leaving it half destroyed and abandoned by its corporate owners. Now it drifted in the emptiness of the Viridian system, a ghost of metal and memories. Just need to reach the supply depot, Derek muttered to himself, checking the station schematics on his holographic display. Should be 2 more corridors down. The outpost had been evacuated in a hurry, that much was obvious from the personal items left behind. A framed photograph here, a treasured trinket there. Derek had learned not to look too closely at these remnants of interrupted lives. Scavenging was a business, not a sentimental journey. When he reached the supply depot, the reinforced door was jammed halfway open. Derek squeezed through the gap, his tactical light illuminating rows of abandoned crates and containers. Most had already been emptied during the evacuation, but corporations always prioritized personnel over provisions. There would be something worth salvaging. 3 hours later, Derek had assembled a respectable haul: medical supplies, preserved rations, power cells, and even a crate of rare mineral samples that would fetch a good price on Artemis Station. As he prepared to transport the goods back to his ship, a faint noise caught his attention, a soft scraping sound from behind a stack of empty containers. Derek drew his sidearm in one fluid motion. "Who's there?" he called out, tactical light sweeping the shadowy corner. "Show yourself." Silence. He approached cautiously, years of combat experience guiding his movements. As he rounded the containers, his light fell upon a small figure huddled against the wall. It was a girl, no, not human, Derek realized as he drew closer. An alien female, humanoid but clearly not of Earth origin. Her skin was a pale blue-gray, almost translucent in places, and her eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangle pattern, were large and dark, reflecting his light like obsidian pools. She was painfully thin, wearing tattered clothing that might once have been a standard-issue jumpsuit. Derek recognized her species instantly, though he'd never seen one in person. A Neheran. Their homeworld had been purged during the exogalactic conflict 5 years ago, officially an unfortunate casualty of orbital bombardment, unofficially a calculated genocide. The few survivors had scattered across the galaxy, becoming refugees in the truest sense, a people without a home. And they were supposed to be extinct. The alien girl pressed herself further into the corner as Derek approached, her 3 eyes never leaving his weapon. "I'm not going to hurt you," Derek said, holstering his sidearm slowly. He removed his rebreather mask so she could see his face. "Do you understand me?" No response. Just that unwavering gaze, filled with equal parts fear and defiance. Derek reached into his pack and pulled out a ration bar and water canister. He held them out, keeping his distance. "Food," he said simply. "Water. For you." After a long moment, the alien girl extended a trembling 6-fingered hand toward the offerings. Derek placed them on the floor and backed away, giving her space. She consumed the food with desperate speed, pausing only to savor small sips of water between bites. Derek watched silently, wondering how long she'd been hiding here. Days? Weeks? The station's life support was failing, she wouldn't have survived much longer. When she finished, Derek unclipped the thermal blanket from his pack and offered it to her. She accepted it with visible hesitation, wrapping the silver material around her shoulders. "My name is Derek," he said, tapping his chest. "Derek Mason." The alien girl watched him carefully, her head tilted slightly in what might have been curiosity. Then, to Derek's surprise, she gracefully slid from her position and knelt before him, head bowed low. "I am Shaylin," she said, her voice melodic despite the translator's mechanical undertones. "Last daughter of House Tamir, of the Neheran people." She raised her head, meeting his gaze. "You have given me sustenance and shelter when death was certain. By our most sacred laws, I pledge myself as your life-bound servant until the ending of all stars." Derek blinked, taken aback. "Wait, what?" "No, I just gave you some food and water." An act of mercy without expectation of return, Shaylin continued, her voice gaining strength. Such compassion demands the life bond. I am yours now, master. I'm not anyone's master, Derek said firmly. And you don't owe me anything. I'm just a scavenger, passing through. Shaylin remained kneeling, apparently unmoved by his protest. The bond has been formed. It cannot be undone. A distant rumble shook the station, sending a shower of sparks cascading from a damaged conduit overhead. Derek's scanner beeped urgently. Structural integrity decreasing. East quadrant decompression imminent, it warned. Derek sighed, looking at the kneeling alien girl. He couldn't leave her here to die, cultural misunderstandings or not. We need to go, he said, extending his hand to help her up. My ship's docked at the west airlock. Can you walk? Shaylin rose with surprising grace despite her weakened state. I will follow wherever you lead, master. Derek, he corrected her firmly. Just call me Derek. As they made their way through the deteriorating station, Derek couldn't help but notice how Shaylin studied him when she thought he wasn't looking. There was something in those alien eyes, intelligence, certainly, but also a kind of fierce determination that he recognized from his military days. Survival instinct, honed to perfection. By the time they reached his ship, the Horizon's Edge, Derek had already decided he would take her to the nearest humanitarian outpost. Someone there would know what to do with a refugee from an extinct species. They could sort out this life bond nonsense, and he could get back to his solitary existence. But as the ship's airlock sealed behind them and Shaylin looked around the cluttered cargo hold with wide, curious eyes, Derek had the unsettling feeling that his life had just become infinitely more complicated. This is your vessel? She asked, touching the metal wall with reverent fingers. Home sweet home, Derek replied, stowing his gear. It's not much, but it flies. Shaylin turned to him, her expression solemn. I will serve you well aboard this vessel, Master Derek. Derek sighed. This was going to be a long journey. For the last time, I'm not your master, Derek said, running a hand through his short, dark hair in frustration. 3 days had passed since their departure from the ruined outpost, and the Horizon's Edge was now cruising toward the Artemis hub, the nearest civilized port with a refugee processing center. 3 days of Derek trying and failing to dissuade Shaylin from her self-imposed servitude. The alien girl paused in her work. She had been meticulously reorganizing his medical supplies cabinet, transforming the chaotic jumble of bandages and medications into an orderly system that even Derek had to admit was a vast improvement. I understand your discomfort with the terminology, Shaylin said, her 3 eyes blinking in sequence, a gesture Derek had come to recognize as her equivalent of thoughtful consideration. Would you prefer another title? Guardian? Provider? Life-giver? Derek sighed. Just Derek. No titles. Shaylin tilted her head, the silvery patterns along her neck catching the light. That would be improper. The life bond requires acknowledgement of hierarchy. Look, Derek said, dropping into the pilot's chair. On Earth, where I'm from, we don't do servitude. It's considered wrong to own another person. You misunderstand, Shaylin replied, her voice gentle but firm. The life bond is not ownership. It is sacred purpose. When one Neharan saves another without obligation or expectation, it creates a debt that can only be repaid through lifetime service. She closed the medical cabinet with careful precision. You chose to save me when others of your kind would have left me to perish. Such nobility demands recognition. Derek opened his mouth to argue further, but was interrupted by the ship's alert system. Proximity warning, announced the automated voice. Unidentified vessel approaching. Scanning signature matches known pirate frequencies. Derek swore under his breath as he activated the tactical display. A modified Corsair-class vessel was rapidly closing the distance between them. Pirates? Shaylin asked, moving closer to observe the screen. Scavengers, like me, but with fewer moral qualms, Derek explained tersely, his hands flying over the controls. They target solo operators, steal their hull, strip their ships for parts, and leave the pilots to die in space. He checked their weapon systems, functional but not designed for extended combat. I can't outgun them, but we might outrun them. The Horizon's Edge shuddered as Derek pushed the engines beyond recommended parameters. For several tense minutes, they maintained their lead, but the pirate vessel was gaining. Their ship has been modified for pursuit, Derek muttered. We need to His words died as Shaylin suddenly reached over his shoulder and pressed a sequence on the navigation console. "What are you doing?" Derek demanded, moving to stop her. "Trust me," she said simply. Before Derek could protest further, the ship veered sharply toward a nearby asteroid field. "Are you insane?" Derek exclaimed. "We'll be torn apart in there." "The Corsair class has superior weaponry but inferior maneuverability," Shaylin stated calmly. "Its sensor array is positioned on the forward hull, creating a blind spot in asteroid fields due to signal reflection." Derek stared at her in disbelief. "How do you know that?" "My people were shipwrights before the purge," she replied without taking her eyes from the approaching asteroids. "I studied vessel designs from childhood." She pointed to a particularly dense cluster of asteroids. "There. The gravitational eddies will mask our energy signature." Against his better judgment, Derek followed her direction, guiding the ship deep into the asteroid field. His heart pounded as they narrowly avoided collision after collision. After 10 harrowing minutes, they reached the cluster Shaylin had indicated. Derek killed the main engines and switched to minimal power, just enough to maintain life support and positioning thrusters. They waited in silence, watching the scanner. The pirate vessel circled the perimeter of the asteroid field twice before changing course and disappearing from their sensors. "They've given up," Derek breathed, tension draining from his shoulders. He turned to Shaylin with newfound respect. "You saved us." "I merely advised," she corrected him. "You piloted with exceptional skill." Derek studied her with new eyes. Where did a refugee learn so much about ships and pirate tactics? A shadow passed over Shaylin's face. "When your world burns, you learn quickly what knowledge keeps you alive." She hesitated, then added, "My father was fleet commander for House Tamir. Before the purge, he taught me to recognize every vessel class in 3 sectors." It was the first personal detail she had shared, and Derek sensed the pain beneath her matter-of-fact tone. He wanted to ask more but decided against it. Some wounds were best left undisturbed. "Thank you," he said instead, "for the advice." Shaylin inclined her head in acknowledgement, the gesture graceful despite her still-gone frame. Over the next week, Derek found himself gradually accepting Shaylin's presence aboard his ship. Each morning, he would wake to find the previous day's mess tidied, his equipment cleaned and maintained, and sometimes even a hot meal prepared from their limited supplies. At first, her constant attention made him uncomfortable. Derek had grown accustomed to solitude in the 5 years since leaving military service. His small ship had been a sanctuary from the noise and demands of other people. Yet Shaylin moved through his space with a quiet reverence that somehow didn't feel intrusive. Most surprising was her knack for repairs. On the 9th day, Derek found her cross-legged on the floor of the engine room, surrounded by disassembled parts of the oxygen recycler, a system that had been functioning at reduced efficiency for months. "What are you doing?" he asked, alarmed at seeing vital equipment in pieces. "The filtration matrix was contaminated with microparticles," Shaylin explained, her 6-fingered hands moving with confident precision as she reassembled the components. "I noticed your breathing pattern had altered, shorter inhalations, increased frequency, a sign of compensating for reduced oxygen quality." Derek hadn't even noticed the change himself. "And you know how to fix it?" "Neharan physiology requires higher oxygen saturation than humans," she said. Maintaining life support systems was essential knowledge for space travel. She closed the access panel and activated the system. A gentle hum filled the room as it powered up, noticeably smoother than before. Derek took a deep breath, surprised by how much easier it felt. "That's impressive." Shaylin's skin flushed a deeper blue at the compliment, the first genuine expression of emotion he had seen from her. "I am pleased to be of service." That night, as Derek lay in his bunk, he found himself reconsidering his plan to drop Shaylin at the refugee center. She was proving herself useful, more than useful. With her knowledge of ships and systems, they made an effective team. And there was something else, something he was reluctant to acknowledge. After years of chosen isolation, her presence was not unwelcome. The next morning, Derek altered their course away from Artemis Hub. "There's a trading outpost 3 days from here," he told Shaylin as she looked at him questioningly. "Better salvage prices, fewer questions. I thought, if you wanted to stick around a while longer, I could use an extra hand." Shaylin's 3 eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, Derek thought she might smile. Instead, she knelt in the formal posture he had come to recognize. "I am honored to continue serving," she said, but this time, beneath the formal words, Derek heard genuine warmth. Just no more kneeling, he grumbled, gesturing for her to stand. And we're partners now, understand? Not master and servant. Shaylin rose gracefully. As you wish, Master Derek. He sighed, but didn't correct her. Some battles weren't worth fighting, and as the Horizon's Edge changed course toward new horizons, Derek found himself surprisingly content with the arrangement, complicated as it was. The markets of Helios Station buzzed with activity as traders from a dozen different systems haggled over goods and services. Derek pushed through the crowded thoroughfare with Shaylin close behind, her slender form draped in a hooded cloak that concealed her distinctive features. In the 2 months since they had begun traveling together, Derek had learned that revealing an inherent among humans often attracted unwanted attention. From xenobiologists eager to study a supposedly extinct species to bounty hunters still operating on outdated exogalactic conflict directives. Keep close, Derek murmured as they navigated toward a particularly disreputable-looking shop tucked between a noodle stand and a tech repair kiosk. Markov's not the friendliest guy, but he pays top credit for quality salvage. Shaylin nodded beneath her hood. I sense many eyes upon us, she whispered. Your reputation precedes you. Derek grimaced. Not always a good thing in this business. Inside the dimly lit shop, a burly man with cybernetic eye implants glanced up from his inventory terminal. Recognition flickered across his face. Mason, he grunted. Heard you were working the outer rim these days. Business takes me where the credits flow, Markov, Derek replied evenly. He placed a small case on the counter. Got something special. Medical nanites, still in factory seal. Salvaged from a corporate transport that hit an ion storm. Markov's mechanical eyes whirred as they focused on the case. Risky salvage. Those corporate ships have tracking beacons in every component. Already neutralized, Derek assured him. Clean and untraceable. As Markov examined the merchandise, Derek noticed 3 men enter the shop, their posture and positioning immediately triggering his combat instincts. They spread out, casually blocking the exit. Been a while, Mason, called the tallest of the 3, a scarred man with a prominent facial tattoo. Still playing lone wolf. Derek turned slowly, keeping one eye on Markov. Vince, thought you'd be serving time on a penal colony by now. Vince's smile didn't reach his eyes. Got early release for good behavior. He nodded toward the case on the counter. That the haul from the Kappa 12 outpost? Funny thing, I had salvage rights to that station. Was delayed by a patrol cruiser. Arrived to find someone had already cleaned it out. Derek maintained a neutral expression. Free salvage is first come, first served. You know the rules. Rules, Vince sneered, moving closer. His hand drifted toward the weapon holstered at his hip. I've got a better rule. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is negotiable. The tension in the room crystallized as Markov quietly stepped back from the counter, clearly unwilling to get involved in what was about to happen. Derek calculated his odds. 3 armed men in close quarters. Not impossible, but not favorable either. Maybe we can work something out, he said, playing for time. A finder's fee. Vince's weapon appeared in his hand with practiced speed. I'm thinking 100% sounds fair. What happened next occurred so quickly that Derek barely processed the sequence of events. Shaylin, who had remained silent and still throughout the exchange, suddenly moved with astonishing speed. She flipped over the nearest display case, sending its contents crashing to create a momentary distraction. In the same fluid motion, she positioned herself between Derek and Vince's drawn weapon. You will not harm him, she stated, her voice carrying a harmonic quality that seemed to vibrate in the air. Vince's momentary surprise gave way to cruel amusement. What's this? Got yourself a pet alien, Mason? He leveled his weapon at Shaylin. Move aside, creature. This isn't your fight. All threats to my master are my concern, Shaylin replied, her posture shifting subtly into what Derek recognized as a combat stance. Vince laughed. Your master? That's rich. Last warning. His words cut off as Shaylin moved. Her attack was unlike anything Derek had seen before, not the brutal efficiency of military hand-to-hand combat, but something more akin to dance. She flowed around Vince's weapon, her 6-fingered hand striking pressure points with surgical precision. Before anyone could react, Vince was on his knees, his weapon clattering to the floor as his arm hung uselessly at his side. His companions drew their weapons, but Derek was ready now. He grabbed a heavy component from a nearby shelf and hurled it at the nearest attacker, while drawing his own sidearm. The ensuing firefight was brief but intense. When it ended, Vince and his associates were incapacitated but alive, and the shop was in disarray. Markov, who had taken cover behind his reinforced counter, emerged with a disruptor rifle in hand. He surveyed the damage with his mechanical eyes, then looked at Derek and Shaylin with newfound respect. "You two work well together," he commented, lowering his weapon. "I'll still take the nanites. At 15% for the entertainment." Later, aboard the Horizon's Edge, Derek watched as Shaylin applied a healing gel to a plasma burn on his forearm, a minor injury from the skirmish. "That fighting style," he said as her cool fingers worked the medication into his skin. "I've never seen anything like it." "Inherent tipple arts," she explained. "Our bodies are more flexible than human physiology permits. We learn to use this advantage in combat." Derek studied her face, now uncovered in the privacy of the ship. "You put yourself between me and a weapon. You could have been killed." "The life bond requires no less," Shaylin replied simply. "Your safety is my primary concern." Something in her tone made Derek look more closely. There was devotion there, certainly the cultural obligation she had explained many times. But there was something else too, something warmer and more personal than mere duty. "Thank you," he said softly, "for protecting me." Shaylin's gaze met his, her three eyes focusing with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Always," she promised, and the word seemed to contain depths beyond its simple meaning. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Derek became acutely aware of how close she sat, of the gentle pressure of her fingers on his arm. In the 2 months they had traveled together, he had come to appreciate not just her usefulness but her company, her quiet intelligence, her surprising humor, her unwavering loyalty. And something else that he had been reluctant to acknowledge, a growing attraction that transcended species and circumstance. Shaylin must have sensed the shift in his thoughts, for a delicate blue flush spread across her cheeks. She completed her ministrations and began to move away, but Derek caught her hand. "You call me your master back there," he said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. "Is that truly how you see me?" Shaylin hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly in his grasp. "The life bond is sacred tradition," she began, then paused. When she continued, her voice was softer, more vulnerable. "But tradition does not dictate the heart." "And what does your heart say?" Derek asked, scarcely believing his own boldness. Instead of answering with words, Shaylin leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, an intimate gesture among her people, he had learned. Her skin was cool against his, her scent like distant stars and unknown flowers. "My heart says that duty brought me to your side," she whispered, "but something greater keeps me there." Derek raised his free hand to cup her face, marveling at the silken texture of her skin. "I've been alone a long time," he admitted. "Thought I preferred it that way. But now." "Now," Shaylin prompted when he trailed off. "Now I can't imagine traveling these stars without you," Derek finished, the truth of it surprising even himself. Shaylin's eyes shimmered with emotion. She turned her face into his palm, her lips brushing his wrist in a gesture that sent warmth cascading through him. "Then I am exactly where I belong," she said simply. As the Horizon's Edge drifted through the vast emptiness of space, its two occupants found themselves navigating a new and unexpected frontier, one where duty and desire, tradition and transformation, wove together to form something neither had anticipated when their paths first crossed in the ruins of a forgotten outpost. The gentle humming of the ship's systems provided a soothing backdrop as Derek studied the navigational charts in the Horizon's Edge's small common area. For months had passed since he had found Shaylin on that abandoned station, and in that time, his life had transformed in ways he never could have anticipated. "The Cerulean Nebula," Shaylin said, gliding into the room with 2 steaming mugs. She handed one to Derek, her fingers brushing his in a touch that lasted slightly longer than necessary. "My people believed it held the spirits of our ancestors." Derek accepted the drink, a spiced tea Shaylin had introduced him to, and made room for her beside him on the worn couch. "Is that where we're headed next?" he asked, gesturing to the holographic display. Shaylin settled next to him, her body naturally curving toward his. In recent weeks, the formal distance she had initially maintained had gradually diminished. Now, these casual moments of closeness felt as natural as breathing. "The nebula contains several unmapped asteroid belts," she explained, "rich in rare minerals, according to old Neheran star charts." She hesitated, then added, There may be others of my kind there. Derek turned to her, surprised. You think some Neherans survived? In the nebula? It was a sacred place, known only to our navigators, Shaylin said, her three eyes focusing on distant memories. When the purge began, some escape vessels were directed there. She traced a pattern on the holographic display, her slender fingers dancing through the light. It is merely hope, not certainty. Derek studied her profile, struck as always by her ethereal beauty. The sharp angles of her face had softened as she regained her health, and the silvery patterns along her neck and temples seemed to shimmer more vibrantly now. He had come to read her expressions with increasing accuracy, the slight tilt of her head that indicated curiosity, the sequential blinking of her eyes when she was processing complex information, the barely perceptible tremble of her inner eyelid when she was moved by emotion. Then we'll go, he decided. The nebula's radiation will provide good cover from any patrols or rival scavengers. Shaylin turned to him, her expression softening. You would do this? Even though there is no guarantee of salvage? Derek reached out, tucking a strand of her silvery hair behind her ear. Not everything is about profit, he said softly. A delicate blue flush spread across Shaylin's cheeks at his touch. These moments between them had been increasing lingering glances, casual touches that set his heart racing, conversations that stretched deep into the ship's night cycle. Neither had put words to the changing nature of their relationship, but Derek felt it like a gravitational pull, inevitable and powerful. Thank you, Shaylin whispered, her voice carrying that musical quality that emerged when she was deeply moved. Derek. He noticed the absence of master with a surge of pleasure. Though she still used the title occasionally, particularly in moments of stress or formal situations, she had begun calling him simply by his name in their private moments. Later that night, as they navigated toward the outer boundaries of the nebula, the ship's proximity alert sounded. A massive solar flare from a nearby star had released an electromagnetic pulse, disabling their main propulsion system. Emergency power engaged, reported the ship's AI as warning lights flashed across the control panels. Estimated repair time, 6 hours. Derek worked alongside Shaylin in the engine room, their bodies moving in practice synchronization as they rerouted power and replaced damaged components. Hours passed in concentrated labor, and when the final connection was restored, Derek found himself watching Shaylin as she methodically closed access panels and stored tools. You've changed, he said suddenly. Shaylin looked up, her head tilting in that questioning gesture he had come to adore. In what way? When I found you, you were. Derek searched for the right words. You were so formal. Every action calculated to serve. Now you move around the ship like it's your home. You argue with me about navigation routes. You make decisions without asking permission. A flicker of alarm crossed Shaylin's features. Have I overstepped? I did not mean to. No. Derek interrupted gently. That's not what I meant. I like this version of you. The real you, I think. The tension in Shaylin's shoulders eased. She approached him slowly, her movements carrying that fluid grace that never failed to captivate him. The life bond begins as duty, she explained, stopping just before him. But it evolves as the souls within it evolve. She hesitated, then reached for his hand, her cool fingers intertwining with his warm ones. My people believe that true bonds transcend their origins. Derek felt his pulse quicken at her touch, at the significance of her words. And what have we evolved into, Shaylin? Instead of answering immediately, she guided his hand to the center of her chest, where he could feel the rapid beat of her heart, so similar to a human's, yet with a distinctive double-pulse rhythm that was uniquely hers. My heart recognizes yours, she said simply. Beyond duty. Beyond obligation. Derek's free hand moved to cup her face, his thumb tracing the silvery markings on her cheek. I've been fighting this, he admitted. Telling myself it was wrong somehow. That you were only here because of your cultural beliefs, not because you truly wanted to be. Then let me show you what I truly want, Shaylin whispered. She rose on her toes and pressed her forehead to his in an inherent gesture of intimacy. But this time, she did not stop there. Her lips, cool and soft, found his in a tentative kiss that quickly deepened as Derek responded, drawing her closer. The sensation was unlike anything he had experienced, alien yet familiar, strange yet perfect. Her skin carried a subtle electrical charge, sending pleasant tingles wherever they touched. When they finally separated, both breathless, Derek saw that the patterns along Shaylin's neck were glowing with a soft blue light. That's new, he murmured, running his fingers along the luminescent markings. Shaylin's eyes half closed at his touch, her breath catching. It is. A sign of arousal among my people, she explained, her voice low, and melodic. Our bioluminescence responds to emotional and physical stimulation. Derek smiled, tracing the patterns with growing confidence. Convenient. Makes it hard to hide how you're feeling. I have no wish to hide from you, Shaylin replied, leaning into his touch. Not anymore. That night, as the horizon's edge drifted at the edge of the nebula, Derek and Shaylin discovered each other in ways that transcended cultural differences and physiological distinctions. Her skin illuminated the darkness of his quarters with patterns of blue light that shifted and intensified with her pleasure. His hands learned the sensitive points of her body, the ridge along her spine, the delicate gills at the base of her neck that fluttered under his touch, the intricate patterns of nerve endings that spiraled across her abdomen. Their joining was both tender and passionate, a dance of discovery and delight. When they finally lay entwined in the aftermath, Shaylin's luminescence pulsing in rhythm with her slowing heartbeat, Derek felt a sense of completion he had never known before. I used to think I preferred being alone, he murmured, tracing lazy patterns on her cooling skin. Spent years avoiding connections, telling myself I was better off that way. Shaylin curled closer against him, her head resting on his chest. And now I realize I wasn't avoiding connections, Derek said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I was waiting for the right one. Shaylin's inner eyelid trembled with emotion. Among my people, there is a belief that some souls are bound together long before they meet in physical form. Perhaps that is why the life bond formed so easily between us. Maybe, Derek agreed, feeling the rightness of her words. Or maybe we both just needed someone who understood what it means to survive when everything familiar has been taken away. Shaylin raised herself on one elbow to look at him, her three eyes soft with affection. You are no longer my master, Derek Mason, she said solemnly. You are my heart's chosen. That is a bond far more sacred than any life debt. Derek drew her down for another kiss, his soul finally at peace. And you are mine, he whispered against her lips. As they drifted into sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, the horizon's edge carried them deeper into the nebula toward possible remnants of Shaylin's past, but more importantly, toward a future neither could have imagined when their paths first crossed among the stars. The Cerulean Nebula lived up to its name, a vast swirl of luminous blue gases and stellar matter that surrounded the horizon's edge like an ethereal ocean. For 3 weeks, Derek and Shaylin had navigated its depths, following fragments of Neharan navigation codes that Shaylin had reconstructed from memory. Sensor readings indicate a manufactured structure ahead, Derek announced, studying the ship's scanner display. Definitely not natural formation. Shaylin leaned over his shoulder, her hand resting lightly on his back in what had become a familiar gesture of affection. The change in their relationship over the past weeks had transformed them both. Derek smiled more, laughed more, the hardened shell of the solitary scavenger gradually giving way to reveal the man beneath. Shaylin had blossomed as well, her natural intelligence and quiet strength emerging from behind the formal servant persona she had initially adopted. It appears to be an inherent sanctuary design, she confirmed, studying the readings. But there are no energy signatures. If anyone was there, they're long gone. Derek heard the disappointment in her voice. We should still check it out, he suggested. There might be records, information about other survivors. The structure turned out to be a small outpost built into a hollow asteroid. As they docked their ship at the derelict station, environmental scans confirmed what they already suspected. No life signs, minimal emergency power, atmosphere thin but breathable. This was a navigation beacon, Shaylin explained as they explored the abandoned corridors. A waypoint for travelers needing sanctuary. The station bore evidence of hasty departure. Personal belongings left behind, doors left open, dried food still in preparation areas. But there were no signs of violence or struggle, giving them hope that the occupants had evacuated safely. In what appeared to be the command center, Derek discovered a data terminal still operational on emergency power. Can you access it? He asked Shaylin. Her 6-fingered hands moved over the alien interface with practiced ease. It contains fragmentary logs, she reported. The last entry is from 5 standard years ago, just after the purge began. Derek moved closer as she activated a holographic recording. The image of an elderly Neharan appeared, his skin a deeper blue than Shaylin's, the silvery patterns on his face more elaborate. This is Elder Corvin of House Melees. The recording began in the melodic Neharan language. Shaylin translated quietly for Derek as the message continued. We have received word that Nehara has fallen. Those of us at Outpost Siler, 9 will rendezvous with the refugee fleet at the coordinates encoded in this message. May the ancestors guide all who seek this sanctuary to find their way to us. Shaylin's inner eyelid trembled with emotion as she decoded the coordinates. The Crimson Expanse, she breathed. A system beyond the consortium's control. Derek laid a hand on her shoulder. Then that's where we go next, he said simply. Shaylin turned to him, her 3 eyes shimmering with unshed tears. You would journey so far from your familiar territories? The Expanse is weeks away, even at maximum speed. For you, Derek smiled, tucking a strand of her silvery hair behind her ear. I'd go anywhere. Their return to the ship was hurried, both energized by the possibility of finding more Neharan survivors. But as they approached the docking bay, a proximity alarm on Derek's wrist unit began to sound. Another ship, he warned, drawing his sidearm. Recently arrived. They crept cautiously toward their vessel, keeping to shadows. Through the viewing port, they could see another ship docked alongside the horizon's edge, a sleek, black craft with military-grade weaponry and no identifying markings. Consortium Black Ops, Derek whispered, recognizing the design. They must have detected our entry into the nebula and followed us. But why? Shaylin asked, her voice tight with fear. The conflict ended years ago. Before Derek could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps forced them to retreat into a maintenance alcove. A squad of 6 heavily armed operatives in dark combat gear marched past, led by a tall figure in an officer's uniform. Spread out and search the station, the officer ordered. Intelligence confirms the target is traveling with a human male. Apprehend them both. Remember, we need the Neharan specimen alive. As the squad dispersed, Derek and Shaylin exchanged alarmed glances. Specimen. Derek mouthed silently. The purge was never about the conflict, Shaylin whispered, realization dawning in her eyes. It was about us, our biology. Neharan physiology contains elements unlike any other known species. They want to study you, Derek concluded grimly. And they're willing to destroy an entire planet to cover it up. They waited until the footsteps faded before Derek carefully assessed their options. There's a maintenance tunnel that runs beneath the docking bay, he recalled from their earlier exploration. We can use it to reach the ship, but we'll need a distraction. Shaylin nodded in understanding. The station's emergency protocols. I can trigger a radiation alert from that terminal. She gestured to a nearby access panel. It will force them to regroup, giving us a window to escape. The plan worked initially. When the alarm sounded, the scattered operatives retreated toward their ship as per standard procedure. Derek and Shaylin used the confusion to reach the horizon's edge through the maintenance tunnel. But as they prepared for emergency departure, the officer spotted them through the viewport. Targets sighted. Prevent their launch, he shouted. The ensuing firefight was chaotic. Derek piloted the ship while Shaylin operated the defensive systems, a dance they had perfected over months of working together. They managed to break free from the docking clamps and navigate into the nebula's densest regions, using the electromagnetic interference to evade pursuit. But their escape came at a cost. A lucky shot from the consortium vessel had damaged their main drive. As they limped deeper into the nebula's protective embrace, warning lights flashed across the control panels. Drive core containment failing, the ship's computer announced. Critical failure imminent. We need to shut it down completely and make repairs, Derek said, his hands flying over the controls. But we're too exposed here. Shaylin studied the navigational display. There, she pointed to a dense cluster of asteroidal matter. The radiation from the nebula will mask our position while we repair. They managed to reach the asteroid field and power down just as the drive core began its final warning sequence. In the sudden silence, broken only by emergency lighting and the soft ping of cooling systems, Derek turned to Shaylin. That was too close, he said, reaching for her hand. Are you all right? She nodded, but her expression remained troubled. They will not stop hunting me, she said quietly. As long as I am with you, your life. She nodded, but her expression remained troubled. They will not stop hunting me, she said quietly. As long as I am with you, your life will be in constant danger. Derek recognized the look in her eyes, had seen it too many times during the war. Self-sacrifice for the greater good. Don't, he said firmly, gripping her shoulders. Don't even think about leaving to protect me. It would be logical, Shaylin argued, though her inner eyelid trembled with emotion. You could return to your territories, your former life. They want me, not you. There is no former life to return to, Derek replied, drawing her closer. My life is with you now, wherever that takes us. The earnestness in his voice silenced her objections. Instead, she leaned into his embrace, her luminescent patterns glowing softly with affection and worry. When the final connections were restored and the system diagnostics showed green across the board, they collapsed exhausted into their shared quarters. We'll reach the Crimson Expanse in 3 weeks if we push the engines, Derek murmured as they lay entwined, the soft blue light of Shaylin's bioluminescence illuminating their small cabin. And then? Shaylin asked, her voice barely audible. Derek traced the glowing patterns along her arm. Then we find your people. And after that, he smiled. We could keep scavenging. Or find a quiet outpost somewhere beyond consortium space. Maybe even start a proper salvage business. Together, Shaylin said, and it wasn't a question. Together, Derek confirmed. He hesitated, then added, There's something I've been meaning to ask. This life bond of yours. Is there a way to make it reciprocal? Where I'm bound to you as much as you're bound to me. Shaylin raised herself on one elbow, her 3 eyes widening in surprise. You would wish this? I would, Derek said simply. If there's a ceremony or ritual, something to formalize that we're equals in this. Partners in every sense. Shaylin's luminescence brightened with emotion. There is the bond of souls, she said softly. It is rare, even among my people. A true joining of equals, entered freely by both parties. That sounds perfect, Derek said, pulling her closer. As they drifted to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, neither noticed the small light blinking on the communication console, a signal being received from deep within the Crimson Expanse. They were awakened hours later by the ship's alert system. The message that had been transmitting was finally decoded enough to be played. This is Sanctuary Vessel Nahara's hope to any surviving Naharan outposts, a voice announced in the melodic language of Shaylin's people. We have established a permanent settlement in the Crimson Expanse. Current population, 4,372 survivors. All are welcome. Coordinates follow. Shaylin's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and joy. 4,000, she whispered. I feared. That you were the last. Derek finished for her, squeezing her hand. But you're not alone. They sat together at the navigation console, plotting their course to the coordinates. The Crimson Expanse was far beyond Derek's familiar territory, a journey that would take them away from everything he had known. But as he watched Shaylin's face, alight with hope and possibility, he knew he was exactly where he belonged. 3 weeks later, they stood together on the observation deck as their ship approached a small terrestrial planet orbiting a red giant star. From orbit, they could see evidence of a growing settlement, buildings, agriculture, the infrastructure of a civilization beginning anew. Welcome to Nahara's Hope, the docking controller greeted them as they requested landing permission. The voice paused upon seeing Shaylin on the view screen. By the ancestors, another survivor? Shaylin could barely speak through her emotion. Yes, she managed. Shaylin of House Tamir. House Tamir. The controller's voice rose in excitement. There are 17 Tamir family members in the colony, including Elder Malin and her grandchildren. Tears flowed freely down Shaylin's face as she turned to Derek, her joy too great for words. He pulled her close, his own eyes damp with emotion. What about your human companion? The controller inquired cautiously. Shaylin straightened, her voice firm despite her tears. This is Derek Mason. He saved my life when all was lost. He is bound to me, and I to him. There was a brief silence before the controller responded. Then he is welcome among us. Any who have shown such compassion to our people in our darkest hour are friends to Nahara's Hope. As they prepared for landing, Derek took Shaylin's hand. You're about to be reunited with your people, he said. I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to stay with them, if you felt your life bond was fulfilled. Shaylin turned to him, her 3 eyes focusing with intense emotion. Derek Mason, she said formally, when I knelt before you on that abandoned station, I pledged myself as your life-bound servant. But what has grown between us transcends that ancient right. She placed her hand over his heart, her luminescent patterns pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. I no longer serve you as master. I choose you as my heart's companion. If you will have me. Derek's answer was to draw her into a kiss that spoke more eloquently than words. When they parted, he pressed his forehead to hers in an inherent gesture of intimate connection. I choose you too, he whispered. Not as servant, not as master, but as equal. As partner. As home. As the horizon's edge descended toward the colony, Derek and Shaylin stood side by side, no longer scavenger and refugee, master and servant, human and alien, but something new, something forged in the fires of survival and tempered by love. The ship touched down on the soil of Nahara's hope, and a new chapter of their journey began, one they would write together. The end.